Gibbs and Peter Granger. The third row of the grid, Peter Fitzgerald, a fair way back surprisingly with Kim Jane. Then row 4 consists of Tony Gregg with Roland Hill. Row 5 consists of Kevin Bartlett, John Phillips, and row 6 rounding out the top 12, Michael Preston and Jeff Newton. 20 laps, Coca-Cola Yokohama Challenge 4 production cars. And this one will be most interesting.
20 laps the distance, as you've said, and of course the man at the moment is Brad Jones, stepping back into the number 2 Perrier Starion Turbo. A blistering lap yesterday, 74.88 seconds. We're about 10 seconds away from the start of the Coca-Cola Bottlers Yokohama Challenge here at Calder Park this afternoon. March 1st, 1987, the opening of the Touring Car Championship. And they're racing and getting away very quickly indeed. On the inside was Brad Jones. An electrifying starter. Fitzgerald has found a little edge up here on the inside. And I noticed that Jones was very, very quick to move across and block that move. How tight do you need it as they come down? There's a bump. Jones is off sideways. One comes back across the racetrack. And the car's all managing to try and get through. And of course, Jones has slid through there on the inside as well. They've all managed, well, I won't say they've all got out of the first turn.
Not from what I heard in the background. Newton has the lead. Brad Jones back in around about 5th or 6th, but there was the odd tinkle in the background. I wonder who's come out of that one. So Newton, the man, what a great start. He was back in position 12 off the start. Granger in the Turbo Commodore on the inside. He's giving it plenty as they make their run down the back straight for the first time. It's V8 versus turbocharged 6-cylinder Commodores, and Newton comes out in front.
And here's Jones fighting back through the field as well. We follow them down through the dog leg, through Motorcraft Corner, down into Glow Weave. Brad Jones got a tap, set out off onto the infield, came slewing back onto the racetrack, held it under control, and don't count him out of it as yet. Number 4 is your race leader, Jeff Newton, and the Commodore VK. Telltale puff of smoke emitting there as they head down the start-finishing line. 19 laps to go, 1 completed, and a good scrap going for the lead.
Peter Granger on the inside in the red VL Turbo Commodore now shows just how quick those cars are. Into the lead. Very solid braking into this right-hander at the bottom of the straight for Coca-Cola. Brad Jones is back to 5th. Right in front of him is Peter Fitzgerald, and Jeff Newton in the V8 has gone back into 3rd. So we've got 2 turbos leading. John Phillips in 2nd position in the dark blue car, and it looks like the 2 Starion combatants, Granger, should I say, Fitzgerald and Jones, are having a good dust-up.
Well, Peter Fitzgerald in the Yokohama Starion and Brad Jones are old foes. They like to get in amongst it. I'm sure we'll see them a little closer together as this race goes into about the halfway stage. Granger, meantime, will lead them down. Car number 28.
He's Granger. He's had the massive brain fade through the right-hander, and there's a nice way of losing the front off a Turbo Commodore there if he doesn't pull it out quickly. So John Phillips has the lead. Car number 26 through Glow Weave Corner. Coming down the front straight, Newton in 2nd place, but under siege from Peter Fitzgerald in the Turbo Starion. Right behind him is Brad Jones, but look at the gap that this Commodore has opened up on the field.
It's stretching its legs across the start-finishing line. Newton still holding down 2nd. Brad Jones coming back. You'll notice Jones here making the big run down on the outside here of Peter Fitzgerald, and they will go side by side, and you'll notice that Fitzgerald, no way will he give Brad Jones an opening on the inside. In fact, he carts him out just a little wider, but Brad, of course, will keep stabbing away there in the Perrier entry and keep Fitzgerald very, very honest over the distance. Newton's car, meantime, is starting a bit of a smoking campaign.
These things suffer from chronic oil surge, particularly on fast corners, and whilst Commodores have shown some brilliant speed in the straight line at a circuit like this one at Calder, they do suffer in a longer race with tyre and brake fatigue, and we've got a 20-lap race on this 2.4 kilometre track. I should think that the little Starions will get up there and serve them shortly.
I think, Rich, it's like a warm-up lap for an ETC championship race.
It is a little bit. We get production car racing in Europe as well, very similar to this, but the Starions tend to lead everything. The big difference that I'm told here is that the Commodores tend to go out in front to start with, but towards the end, the brakes tend to fade a little bit.
The drivers do too. As you can see there, Newton was caught wide. There's our race leader, doing it comfortably using the wide part of the circuit, but goodness me, coming up behind Fitzgerald is Brad Jones in the Perrier entry. We'll watch this as they head downhill to the right-hander at Coca-Cola.
Well, Brad Jones has had the save of the day in any case because of the way he retrieved the Perrier car at the bottom of the straight in the first lap was quite remarkable. But right in behind his arch enemy, Peter Fitzgerald. These two cars identical. Fitzgerald with a new sponsorship arrangement this year with Yokohama. Brad Jones still the lead Mitsubishi driver in Australia. Looking a little worse for wear down the left-hand side, but look at the gap that John Phillips has got over Peter Fitzgerald. Behind Brad Jones, then it's Jeff Newton, Michael Preston, and then Kim Jane in the orange Bob Jane T-Mart's car coming up as well. Oh, and that's Jane, who's just lobbed himself into the sandpit to have a play with his bucket and shovel, so he's out of business.
That's caught a few drivers over the weekend. So Kim Jane in the Bob Jane T-Mart's car at the circuit owned by Bob Jane. Exits at the end of the back straight. There's the gap, first to second.
And that gap is now some 3.3 seconds, Phillips to Fitzgerald.
And Phillips appears to be doing it very comfortably at this stage.
Last weekend at Amaru Park in Sydney, this car started out very strongly along with Peter Granger in another 20-lap race and battled quite severely at the head of the field. And then finally, as we were talking about before, Richard ran out of brakes and had to be pulled off the circuit, and the Starions came up trumps, but he's certainly working up a very healthy lead at the moment. They're going to have trouble tracking him down.
There's the gap between the race leader back to Peter Fitzgerald and Bradley Jones. So the Commodore at this stage leading the two Turbo Starions, and in fact I think you'll find that Fitzgerald is picking up the race leader as they head down into the right-hander. Nicely turned out Yokohama entry for Peter Fitzgerald, using the full width of the racetrack as he comes out tailing, and we'll try and get the split for you.
Well, Fitzgerald using Yokohama radial tyres, and these cars of course run a virtually standard radial type tyre, although they're buffed down to a minimum tread depth of 2 millimetres. But Brad Jones this year for the first time is using a new BF Goodrich tyre, which in the first two production car races of the season have proved very good. He took a win at Oran Park 3 weeks ago and then a win last weekend at Amaru Park, so he's the man to watch at the moment. And it's become a real tyre war battle in production car racing in Australia over the last 3 or 4 months, with quite a number of companies becoming involved, because this is obviously the class that shows a lot of potential. It's a class that this year boasts a state and national series, and it has national championship status, and there will be an Australian production car champion for the first time in the history of Australian motor racing at the end of the season. There's Jeff Newton's V8 Sonico entry into the pits, obviously with some problems.
Yeah, you were talking about tyres, Neil. These cars actually are allowed very, very limited modifications, and one of the few areas where you can gain an advantage is in the tyre department. Brad Jones sliding the car about there on the Goodrich tyres, and BF Goodrich and Starion, certainly in Britain, have gone very well together. They won the championship last year.
These cars can literally be purchased off a showroom and taken racing. John Phillips, car number 26 with a Turbo Commodore, only recently released on the market in VL form, and with the inclusion of a safety harness, a roll bar and a fire extinguisher, you can virtually go racing. The only modifications permitted are rubber, as Richard's just discussed. You can also change the brake pad lining material. That's free, and you can experiment there, and you also have the freedom of being able to experiment with shock absorbers, but you can't change spring rates. So effectively anybody who enjoys motorsport can go racing in this class, and it generally provides for a lot more drivers to get into the sport than would be the case with, say, for example, Group A touring cars. Phillips, our leader, car 26 in the Commodore from Peter Fitzgerald in the Starion. Quite a comfortable second now from Brad Jones. And look at the understeer from Phillips' car that time. Boy, he was shoveling it off the road.
It's got some poke in a straight line,
though. Has it ever? It sits up and boogies down this long straight.
Might be time to have a look at the race splits now on our Castrol GTX splits. John Phillips is our race leader in the Commodore Turbo. 3.43 seconds clear of Peter Fitzgerald. Then 0.09 of a second back to Brad Jones and the Perrier Starion Turbo running in third. And that is a healthy build-up. 3.43 for the race leader on screen at the moment.
Well, we're looking at potentially the first Turbo Commodore victory, if he can pull it off, but still a long way to go. Only 7 laps completed, 20 laps the total duration of the race. And even now, as you look in the background, you notice that Starion becoming ever closer.
Yes, it'll close. The other interesting point is the Of course, the touring cars this year have picked up Shell Ultra as the major sponsor with $275,000 in stake money. But the production cars over the past few years, really the division that has been picking up the prize money. A lot of manufacturers and, of course, a lot of trade support for production car racing. And obviously, I guess if it all goes full cycle in Australian motorsport, we'll wind up with cars like these running at the James Hardy and the other major touring car races given a few more years.
It's more than possible when you consider the outrageous cost now of going Group A touring car racing. If you just decided that you wanted to have a go as a motorsport enthusiast, it's prohibitive. It's certainly fine for the professional teams and they do it well, and many people can afford to do it. But this type of racing means you can probably go into the sport for around about $25,000 to $30,000, which is obviously very, very good.
Yeah, that's a situation actually that very nearly came about in Britain with Group A racing. It very nearly changed to production racing last year because of lack of entries, again because of the cost.
Yes.
There's Phillips, the race leader, Peter Fitzgerald in second, and Brad Jones still in third. Replay time now, showing some incidents. And one driver involved, car number 24, or 14 it was, sliding off Clyde Lawrence. That is not the place to go off at Calder Park. It's been very wet here over the past 2 days, and the sand trap has collected any number of visitors in the practice sessions yesterday prior to qualifying for the Touring Car Championship. In fact, just about every Commodore driver paid a visit to the sand trap, the killer bunkers of Calder.
Brad Jones in third position in the Perrier Starion. The official Mitsubishi Works driver of Australia, who will be running their touring car later in this season, and he'll be teaming up with Japanese driver Akihiko Nakaya to run our long distance races and at least part of the Shell Ultra Australian Touring Car Championship. Last year put in some fine performances, you recall, in Hardy's Heroes, made his way into the top 10 with a stunning performance, and has been one of the lead production touring car drivers for the last few years. We'll see him a little bit more this afternoon as well, because he's going to drive Brian Thompson's monstrous 6-litre Chev Monza. So what a contrast that is from the production car to the Trans Am car.
There's a very talented driver, Brad Jones. At the moment, though, he still has a lot of work to do, so does Peter Fitzgerald. Race leader John Phillips still with 3+ seconds over Peter Fitzgerald and Brad Jones, who have been following back in third place, and they've opened up. Time to recap the placings at the moment on our Castrol scoreboard. Oils ain't oils. John Phillips is your race leader, Peter Fitzgerald is second, and Brad Jones is third. Lap 12 of 20 in the Coca-Cola Bottlers Yokohama production car race at Calder Park. We have a great scrap going here for second spot between Peter Fitzgerald in the Yokohama Starion Turbo and Brad Jones in the Perrier car, number 2. And Jones has made up a lot of ground in the last 2 laps, closing dramatically on Peter Fitzgerald. They haven't been able to rope back in the race leader, though, at this stage. John Phillips in the Commodore Turbo, still holding probably around about 3 seconds. We'll check the gap for you in our Castrol split shortly.
I'll give you an accurate gap. It's 3.8 seconds. So
it's holding steady.
He's managed to open up half a second, but this battle here is where all the attention is focused at the moment. Brad Jones nibbling away at the back of the Yokohama Starion. A slightly wider line entering Coca-Cola.
Oh.
Fitz runs wide. Brad takes the opportunity very nicely, makes the apex and takes the Perrier car through to second position. Now, can Fitzgerald come back? He dives in very deep as they go through this right and left-hand series and over the Bob Jane Hill.
These two have a beautiful love-hate relationship going. It's really on the boil.
And of course, it's not really getting them anywhere, because while they fight among themselves, Phillips is just getting further away.
He certainly is. The Commodore Turbo running very, very sweetly. Waltzing around, just a touch under brakes that time. Brad Jones.
Well, that was a real unforced error from Peter Fitzgerald. He was pressured into it, ran a little wide. It's a very, very hard corner to get into. You're in 5th gear absolutely flat strap. These cars are doing about 230 kilometres an hour at the bottom of the straight. Quite extraordinarily. You wouldn't expect a production car to be going that quick down there. And now, with the gap being reduced by some 6/10, Brad Jones is getting just a little closer. And if he can get up and win this one, he's done the triple header in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
He had a few anxious moments, of course, as you'll recall.
Well, how he recovered from that, I'll never know. Once you end up on the grass in motor racing, particularly wet grass as it is at the moment, it's usually curtains for you.
So you can be thankful that the area that he went off is relatively smooth. He'd hit a couple of bumps on the way through. It might have been a different story.
One of the cars, Richard, which we were hoping to see was the new turbo Mazda RX-7, a car being campaigned by 2 Australian drivers. A chap by the name of Gary Walden from New South Wales took the car out to Oran Park a couple of weeks ago, but they've got an overheating problem at the moment that they're working on. But they will be extraordinarily fast once they sort that, as I understand it, and from the testing that I've seen, and they could be a real fierce competitor to these Mitsubishi Starions. So that's something to look forward to later in the year as we work through this series in the state and national championship.
Once again, back onto the start-finishing straight here at Calder Park. And the positions still the same. Gaps are about the same. Let's have a look at the race splits now. Courtesy of Castrol GTX2, John Phillips and the Commodore Turbo. 2.93, that gap has been brought back by Brad Jones in the Starion Turbo, 174 in arrears. So 2.93, 174 back to third. So Peter Fitzgerald, who looked a big chance early in the race, now finds himself back to third, and the man who sat on pole for the event and was noticeably quicker than anyone else yesterday in qualifying. A lap of 74.88 versus Kent Youlden in 75.40. So there's our race leader, John Phillips in the Commodore Turbo, sponsored by Gladesville Auto Wreckers.
Well, there'll be the cold fear of terror starting to run up his spine at the moment, because he'll see Brad getting closer and closer in the mirror. There's nothing worse than that feeling. And when you're all arms and legs and trying your hardest, and there doesn't seem to be anything else to do, it's most discomforting. But he's the man under pressure at the moment. He's done a fine job so far. 16 laps completed, 20 the total distance. The Coca-Cola Yokohama Challenge.
The problem that he's going to be having now, of course, is with the weight of that car, throwing it around as these guys do with the production cars, the tyres will be getting a bit softer than they were before, and the rubber on them will be starting to melt. He'll have less grip. The suspension will be more tired, and most important of all, the brakes will be very tired indeed. And as you said, he'll be spending most of his time looking in his mirror now just to see how much further back Brad is.
They're all using pretty firm pads to pull these up at the bottom of the straight, and because it's been a longer race, they couldn't afford to use something that had real sensitivity from the beginning. And they had a brake problem with that car last weekend. They seem to have rectified it now, though, and I think it's more a case of John just keeping it together and staying cool and making all the apexes and driving smoothly.
He's done a good job up to this point, and he's looking quite cool at the wheel. Swings out of glow weave on the approach to the start finishing line, this time across the strike. 17 laps completed and 3 remaining, and there's the gap.
The only thing missing from these production cars is the roar. We've got turbos leading the pack at the moment. They're whisper quiet.
Certainly are. Jones very quick through this part of the course. It's the only tricky part of Calder Park. The rest really straights.
Some great car control here from Jones. Really knows how to squeeze 10.5 tenths out of this little motor car.
Phillips just getting away from Bradley Jones in the Perrier Starion Turbo. Peter Fitzgerald has been hosed off by Brad Jones, dropping back to almost 2 seconds behind Jones in third.
Just done the split, and it's 2.8, and this time through they will have completed 18 laps, so 2 laps to go. He's got to get a second and a half a lap in the next 2 to do something about this, and I don't really think he's got enough time. I think that Phillips has done a remarkable job here in spite of what would be a slightly tired car by now. There's Fitzgerald in third position. Hasn't been able to answer. Fitzy's been around a long time in our 7 Motorsport telecasts. Well known to us for his production car racing. He's been up amongst the front runners for the last half a dozen years. He's also turned his hand very nicely at sports sedan racing. He ran a Porsche for some time and thrilled us at Amaroo Park. It's a good deal that he's got with Yokohama this year for the major sponsorship package on this car. He's remained faithful with Mitsubishi for 87. He was looking around at the end of last year trying to decide the right way to go, as many drivers are at the moment, and whether they toss up for a VL Turbo Commodore or stay with a Starion, look at the Mazda. There's a lot of waiting going on at present as people decide what the go is, but it appears as though both the Commodore and the Starions are very, very competitive.
Well, I would think at this stage John Phillips has certainly given all those considering Turbo Commodore power for production car racing a great boost of confidence. The car running superbly, car number 26. Going down to the right-hander at Coca-Cola, just floats it in on the inside of 45, puts a wheel up on the curb, just, oh, there wasn't much in that. He's running into a little bit of traffic. He gets held up here for a moment or two. Jones might gain on him marginally. Once again, Holden here giving him a tough time, but he comes through onto the back straight, heads down towards Glowweave. Jones hanging in there, but Phillips has done a great job. There's the gap. First back to second. Oh, and he's gone. Comes out onto the grass, catches it back up again. Can he hold on?
Oh, no. He is in real strife. Brad Jones is zeroing in on the back of the Commodore. He's got to within around about 2 or 3 car lengths. Phillips dives for the curb, launches the car. Jones comes ripping around the outside. He drops one in the dirt. The rest of the field is thrown in the cards. They're off in the grass.
Coming up for the Coca-Cola Yokohama Challenge Cup. Checkered flag comes out and Phillips just gets there. Well, and off in the last corner, John Phillips has lasted. Of course, Brad Jones threw everything at him. Jones really didn't get the run of traffic, same as Phillips on the run down the back straight. And then, of course, that threw Phillips offline. So a good win there to John Phillips.